Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie.
Oh.
And we are talking about UFC 302. I have to make that clear with a shyster like Phil over here. UFC 302, which is an event being put on by the mixed martial arts promotion, the UFC, which stands for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And this being their 302nd pay-per-view event. Is all of this clear, Phil? There's no jokes?
No ambiguity.
Great. The main event of this card, Islam Makhachev, the lightweight champion, is defending against fan favorite, beloved fighter, really, Dustin Poirier. And there's some other stuff too. Sean Strickland, Costa, Randy Brown versus Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos. Fun welterweight fight. There's a couple other good ones on here too. It's not what I would call a gangbusters pay-per-view lineup, but it's fine. And certainly, the main event will be interesting, if only as a further demonstration, perhaps, of Islam Makhachev's brilliance. There's no point in burying the lead. I think we both have that feeling going into this one, Phil. Am I correct? That Makhachev should be pretty solidly favored to win.
I believe he is. I haven't looked at the odds, but I believe he is.
I'm guessing he is.
Quite heavily favored to win. Yeah, I think I've seen this one described as being like the Volkanovski Korean Zombie fight. Where, you know, it's a beloved action fighter getting their title shot, and everyone is sort of expecting that, you know, they've earned it in a weird way. I mean, you could argue that Poirier sort of hasn't, because he's already had his chance at the belt twice. But yeah, everyone loves them, but it's probably going to be an execution.
Yeah. I mean, it's not exactly the Volkanovski Korean Zombie in that I don't think Poirier is as shot now as Korean Zombie was then. I know he had a tough fight with Benoit Saint-Denis, but I did not think it was a kind of tough fight that was out of line with some difficult fights he's had in the past. And as I said at the time, unlike the commentators and many other people watching it, I kind of felt like I knew what was going to happen even as he was losing the first round. I was just watching it thinking, this is not sustainable. The younger man is going to end up destroying himself, and Poirier is kind of waiting for that to happen. And it did. So I felt very confident in Poirier even as that fight was started off going against him. I think he's, you know, just before that was that second fight with Justin Gaethje where he looked great, albeit got knocked out by a perfect head kick, but he looked fantastic, as good as he's ever looked on the feet. The real thing is that this is just a poisonous style matchup for Dustin Poirier. You know, however diminished he may be being older, I think he's like 37, isn't he? 35. 35 and 15
35
years.
with a lot of...
Yeah.
A lot of, tread off the tires at this point.
15 years and 39 fights into his pro career. That is, unless you ask Dustin himself, who claims to have a ton of professional fights back in Louisiana early on that were never recorded. So perhaps more than 39 fights in his pro career. I don't think that's the concern. It's the fact that I've seen Dustin Poirier fight Khabib. I've seen him fight Charles Oliveira. I saw him lose to both. And I saw him lose to both pretty damn decisively. And here we go. Another grappler. It's wild, really, if you look at Poirier's record. He has fought so many strikers over the course of his UFC career, which is great. I love watching him fight strikers. But every time he works his way up to the point. Basically, he has to work his way up to fight like the grappler, who's one of the best in the division. And that's when you find out why you'd probably prefer to see him fight, a striker again. So, I don't know. What do you think, Phil? Tell me about... go on.
It's less the specifics of the style matchup, or at least how the fight can go. Yeah, rather than it is Poirier's now dyed-in-the-wool tendencies, and the fact that we know that Makhachev is backed by an extremely analytical, game plan heavy camp, who are going to be very prepared to adjust for that. And this is the thing, is that Poirier is a very good grappler in his own right. He beat up Anthony Pettis on the floor and, ended up getting it was sort of a TKO, but it was just Anthony Pettis falling to pieces, as he occasionally does. He's a genuinely good grappler. He's obviously insanely potent on the feet. He brings some tools on the feet that, possibly Makhachev hasn't had to deal with. Lots of things that could spell the recipe for an upset. But you're also talking someone who has, notably his first instinct in grappling situations is to go for his gilly and to give up position. But more damningly than this, it's the ATT lack of cagecraft. Meaning that you have to ask him you cannot ask him to fight a disciplined performance where he's making Makhachev pay for every entry, and that he's moving away from shots, and that he's going to be fighting a sprawl and brawl game plan. If you're expecting Poirier to win this fight, I don't think that's how you can do it, because he's probably going to get backed up into the cage quite quickly. He can be aggressive. I think, against Oliveira, he did come out very aggressively, but it's just not who he is. He's just, as we've said many times, he's just an ATT product who will take the directionality of the fight that is offered to him.
Yeah, if it's exclusively a striking... Go on. Yeah.
If his opponent wants to push him back, he will go back to the cage, and he will try and slip and parry and counter from there. If they're trying to draw him onto shots, he'll come after them. But at no point will he attempt to dictate the direction of the fight in any other direction. Which means that if you want him to beat Islam Makhachev, it has to be a firepower question. It means that he needs to hurt Islam so badly that, the points at which Islam inevitably pushes him up against the cage and takes him down are not as worthwhile as what Poirier has done to him. Meaning that he either needs to finish him or needs to hurt him bad enough that, if Makhachev takes him down, it still doesn't win him in the round. And those are difficult things to ask.
Yeah.
Because, there's just, you can expect many, many things from Dustin Poirier. You cannot expect consistency from him in this kind of fight.
Yeah. Yeah, in an exclusive striking context, he's actually a beast with his back to the fence. Right?
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think he's like that.
Yeah.
Is that, he's the much better version of what Tyron Woodley used to be like.
He's like Robbie Lawler, He's like Robbie Lawler when somebody's pressuring him. Okay, time to go defense. Block, nasty counter, combination, body shot. He stays incredibly calm and composed and genuinely has good boxing defense. But yeah, you will pay for an inattention to cagecraft when the opponent's style plays into one of your greater weaknesses. And I agree. I think he's not a bad grappler by any means. It's really just that he doesn't have the discipline on the ground that he does on the feet. You know, and he spent a long time developing that discipline on the feet. And even then, it sometimes gets away from him where he will just go apeshit. On the ground, though, he has retained, perhaps because he's fought so many strikers. He just hasn't, I mean, look at how long it took him fighting mostly strikers to turn into the incredible MMA boxer we have today. It was a very long road. Perhaps because of that, he has retained his sort of reckless first impulse tendencies on the ground. The guillotine, for example, giving up his back. I've seen many fights where Poirier has not addressed the hands when somebody's trying to choke him out from the back. I mean, he'll take other ways of escaping. He'll try to sit down into back control or get a hip to the floor and squirm out that way, but he is not a methodical grappler. And, in the few occasions where he has faced grapplers who also happen to be the best grapplers in the sport, and Islam Makhachev is in that company, he has paid for those tendencies big time. The other thing is that in a matchup where he knows that's an issue, the Khabib one is the one that really comes to mind. He really seemed to go into that fight thinking, I cannot get taken down by this guy. And it actually made him a much worse striker, much worse than he is capable of being. He threw a lot of wild looping punches. He could not establish or find his range very easily. This is a thing. It even happened to Volkanovski when he fought Islam Makhachev the first time around, and his striking was just much wilder and less precise than it was against, say, Max Holloway, where all he had to worry about was the boxing. It is a law of MMA. If you're fighting a dangerous grappler and you are focused on not getting taken down, you're not so sure you can stop the takedowns that you can kind of just deal with them as they come, your striking will suffer. You know, you only have so much processing power. And, I think he was better than that against Charles Oliveira. But I think Charles Oliveira was also much more, actually, insisted more on a striking match. And that was what Poirier had to deal with. And then when Charles started to get hurt and started to look for more takedowns, they started to work.
Yep.
So it's one way or the other. Either you get drawn into a striking match and then you kind of forget about the takedown and you get surprised by one, or you're fixated on the takedowns and you're not as good a striker as you usually are. And
it was also just Charles responding to Poirier's aggression with just more aggression, just immediately caused Poirier to forget where he was in the cage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because, as I said, beginning of that fight, he knows he has to be aggressive. He has to put Oliveira on the back foot, and he actually does a very good job of it in the first half of the first round. But as it goes on, Oliveira just keeps engaging in firefights, and Poirier just naturally settles back into the rhythm of who he is as a fighter, which is just, what's going to happen to pretty much everyone.
And he starts winning that fight. He starts countering Oliveira and hurting him, but still, it's part of the process that he ultimately ends up losing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is just a very rough style matchup to expect Dustin Poirier to prevail in, even if you were confident that this is, a prime Dustin Poirier who is fully confident about all this kind of stuff, who really believes that he's the champion. And, you know, before the Khabib fight, there was all the kind of, you know, he had all the kind of paid in full stuff, the idea that this was something that this was the culmination of a journey, that he was getting there, that he was finally going to get the belt after all this time. And this time, what you're mostly hearing from him, well, what I've heard was that he said, you know, I'm going to retire, win or lose, probably. And yeah, that doesn't necessarily make you think that this is going to be the most, it makes you think this is more likely to be a less disciplined rather than more disciplined performance. And still more is that fight against Benoit Saint-Denis. Because if there was anything that was going to make a case for Poirier fighting Islam Makhachev, it wasn't going to be jumping on a bunch of gillies and giving up a bunch of top position and then just knocking Saint-Denis out once he got knackered.
Yeah. A thing that has basically been a meme for us throughout his career. Actually, like, that was a fight in which Poirier embraced it. He's really embraced it, like, online and in interviews and stuff since. But, like, literally in the fight, he was like, oh, it is a meme.
Yep.
I think there's a moment in the corner where Mike Brown's like, enough guillotines. And he looks at Mike Brown like, what? He just, like, he just wanted to keep doing it. And then, of course, the wonderful post-fight interview where Joe Rogan says, they kept asking you to stop doing the guillotine. And he said, I ain't never going to stop. You know, like, it is ridiculous. On the one hand, I'd love to think... Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Obviously, him guillotining Islam Makhachev would be very funny. And I'm sure that is, in fact, probably overrepresented in the betting odds as an outcome, because there's going to be a bunch of people who are going to want that betting slip just in case.
I would want it just as a souvenir. I'd hang that on my wall. I lost $80 picking Dustin Poirier to win by guillotine.
Again, I think the odds are probably narrower than they should be on that one, because a whole bunch of people are going to do that just for the lulz.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it didn't make his case as someone who's going to be a good matchup for Islam.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there is one obvious factor that we talked about before the show, and it's the obvious one that we always have to bring up, which is, you know, we discounted it for Volkanovski Makhachev stupidly,
and we shouldn't have.
But we shouldn't discount it for Islam himself, which is, what does this person look like when he fights southpaws?
And there are very few examples of that.
There are very few of them.
Dustin Poirier has fought some notable southpaws. You know, none of them were easy fights, including against Jim Miller. But he beat them. Jim Miller, he beat Conor McGregor. I think there's a couple other ones in there as well. So he has definitely fought and beaten southpaws enough to know that he knows how to handle it. He also has a kind of southpaw game, which you would expect to work. Like, notably that Dustin Poirier is a big jab boxer. He uses his jab a lot against orthodox and southpaw opponents. Makhachev is much more of a southpaw.
Yep.
Not that he won't use his jab, but it is much more in his mind a setup, a rangefinder, a feint. He is typically looking for various switch-ups off the left side, whether it's any of like 3 or 4 varieties of left kick, or either a straight or looping left hand. Those are pretty much his weapons on the feet. And he does have a right hook as well. Of course, he knocked down Chucky Olives with it, but much more what you think of when you think of a southpaw. And who has he fought that is also a lefty?
Yeah. I mean, there's... Drew Dober is a lefty, right?
Mm-hmm. Drew Dober.
And Drew Dober does not count. He is Drew Dober. Sorry, Drew. And absolutely allergic to wrestling.
Yeah.
like historically, and even more so back then than he is now.
Yep.
So broadly somewhat meaningless. But obviously, like, the big one is that I believe Adriano Martins is a southpaw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he fought, well, if he isn't, he fought their entire fight southpaw. And the ending of that fight, obviously the sole blemish on Islam Makhachev's career, is Islam, like, leaping in with a big left hand and then just getting absolutely slapped with a counter right hook.
Yep. Just got sparked.
If you are a Poirier fan, this is what you must absolutely be pinning your hopes and dreams on.
Yep.
It is that, like so many other fighters, will lower his volume and lower his pressure, and he is up against the unfamiliar stance disparity. Because that's the other thing about that fight, is that it's with Adrian Martins, is that it is also like quite slow paced. I mean, it's an Adrian Martins fight. It's a famous one and done merchant, but even then, like, Makhachev is not pressuring him much. But the other thing about it is also obviously that it's an extremely nascent version of Islam Makhachev.
For sure.
He simply, whether he was in orthodox or for opponents, he just wasn't striking back then like he does now.
Yeah. I will note,
and
he also does not pressure in the fight with Drew Dober.
Mm-hmm.
So this is perhaps, I mean, Islam even more recently, he is he's not like a horribly low output striker by any means, but he does like a controlled, steady pace even today.
Yep.
Even when he pressures, it is a pressure born of footwork and feints more than anything else. And his striking is largely, his actual strikes are mostly pot shots. So yeah, and even against Drew Dober, I mean, he doesn't look particularly comfortable on the feet against Drew Dober. Of course, it's Drew Dober, he doesn't have to. The moment he goes for a takedown, it just works. But, like first moment of that fight, if I recall correctly, is like an exchange of jabs where Dober just lands his jab and Islam doesn't. But
yeah,
like you said, it hardly counts because he can just do the thing he does really well, basically automatically at will.
Yep. Last one, Gleison Tebow.
Oh, and Tebow, yeah, an ancient Tebow who got destroyed.
A very old. Gleison Tebow. He managed to avenge Tebow destroying Khabib.
That's right.
But I mean, again, when you look at how the fight played out, it is extremely low pace. Like, Makhachev is not, again, like Martins, Gleison Tebow is not going to be enforcing a high pace on you, but Makhachev, for his part, is also not, he's not trying to force a high pace either. Tebow's like, we're going to do this slowly, and Makhachev's like, yes, we are.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, nothing much happens until Makhachev just deads him with essentially a cleaner and more technical version of the same level changed left hand that got him slapped against Martins.
True. Mm-hmm.
Like, it's still like a, is one of his first committed strikes is still like a huge left hand.
Mm-hmm.
It just works in this fight. So yeah, all of that sort of is encouraging if you're Dustin Poirier. He's still a massive hitter. He's obviously has a brutal right hook. He has landed it as a counter on many, many opponents. If Makhachev comes in like even slightly freaked out and thinks I've got to close distance by doing something stupid, and I've got to shock him, and then doesn't set up his entries, because he should. This is the one thing I think is that Makhachev, despite Poirier's obvious like allergy to to the ground. Makhachev really should strike with Poirier to set his takedowns up.
Oh, sure.
If he tries this kind of approach, just not doing very much and then leaping in with one huge punch, it might work. But it's also gambling his title on a single big entry.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he basically needs to work his way into the fight. And I'm sure he will. This is the thing. For all the stylistic issues, for all the fact that, if he gets stuck in an uncomfortable striking match with someone, and he's just not all that he's just not all that good in the close stance matchup.
Mm-hmm.
Poirier can hurt and drown him much more effectively than Volkanovski could.
Yeah.
But I just cannot trust that to happen. Can't trust Poirier not to get pushed back to the fence. I can't trust, I have to think that Makhachev's team know that they've scouted him carefully twice now.
Yeah.
And it's also one of those ones where a big part of me would love to see Dustin Poirier win this.
Oh,
obviously,
man.
because I love him. And because I've followed his career since the WEC days.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been incredible to watch his journey and all this other kind of stuff. But it's also one of those fights where I find myself thinking Dustin Poirier kind of doesn't deserve to win this fight.
How dare you? You wash your mouth out with soap,
I mean?
Sir. I don't know what you
mean.
mean. Explain yourself.
Because Makhachev is on track to being, if not already, the greatest lightweight in the history of MMA.
Yeah.
And I don't, as much as people talk about Dustin Poirier's resume and all that kind of stuff, he's never going to be that. And so as much as I love Dustin Poirier, and I think, honestly, I still am going to be rooting for him, there is a part of me that is just I will feel, if Makhachev loses this, I will feel like it is a greater fighter losing to a lesser one. To a, one who might be more fun and cooler and, but this is that, Makhachev represents, just greatness in a way that, Dustin Poirier maybe doesn't.
I think for me, the perfect outcome would be Dustin Poirier gets a miracle win, and then they rematch, and Makhachev destroys him.
Yeah, probably.
You know what I mean? They rematch, Makhachev destroys him, and that's his GSP Sarah moment, where he's like, see, I slipped up, but I avenged myself. That's part of a great legacy as well. It's okay to lose. How do you deal with it is big. So I would love to see Poirier win.
I would, to be honest, as much as I'm saying all this stuff, I would be marking the fuck out.
I just love
Dustin Poirier actually did it.
Who doesn't love Dustin Poirier, man? He's just the coolest dude in the sport.
Mm-hmm.
He's 35 years old and he hasn't even come close to expressing a political opinion. I mean, I love him for that alone. He's just a pure fighter, man. I love his personality. I love that he's a pretty nice, open, humble, honest guy who also has a pretty thinly veiled layer of pride and mean streak, just under the surface that you get to see come out. I just watched the fight with the rematch with Eddie Alvarez last night. And man, the moments after that fight is such a wonderful. Dustin Poirier's actually been really good on the mic for a long time.
Yeah.
And he gets up there and John Anik asks him, it looked like you got into it with Mark Henry there, which he did after the fight. And he's like, look, I respect Mark Henry, but they were saying I quit in the last fight, and that's disgusting to me. I would never quit. I would die in here. I'm a fighter. That's who I am. And Eddie was saying that, and being part of his team, you're riding with him. So, it's this mixture of being I respect Mark Henry, but fuck that guy. Like, that's Dustin Poirier, man. He's just, he's a real one. And his fights are incredible.
But also, like, we've seen genuine emotion from him. Like, you know, when he absolutely, like, just collapsed into tears after that, his loss against Korean Zombie.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he's amazing. It's been amazing to watch his career. As I said, there is a little part of me, the little nerdy bitch part, that would be like, well, actually, it's Makhachev. It's probably just, you know, he's devoted more of his career to just winning and being good than Dustin Poirier has. As Dustin Poirier has devoted his career basically to being fun and badass.
Yeah, well,
and there is a part of me that just wants, like, still thinks of MMA as being like the, you know, who is the best at things if they really, really try their hardest.
Of course. Who's the best?
You know, I don't want to see people, like, doing meme stuff.
Who's the best is the whole reason for sport in general. So you gotta respect Islam, and he will go down, almost certainly as a greater fighter than Poirier, but Poirier is an all-time great in his own right. No question. And just one of the easiest fighters to root for and to enjoy watching that there has ever been. Right up there with guys like Robbie Lawler as just a all-time great action fighter. So yeah, there's some chances. We'll see what happens in the striking. Poirier is also a better counter-puncher as a rule than any of the other guys, but I do really expect that. I mean, here's the thing, like, Islam will throw in a takedown early on, probably, just to make sure Poirier's thinking about it. He did that in the rematch with Volk. You know, just immediately shot for a double. And Volk stops it all confidently. In fact, I think Volk stops it, and you can hear him go, which is badass and would have been a great moment, especially if he'd won. That he's just dismissively stopping the takedowns. But then he gets hit by every single left side attack that comes his way after that, and gives up the pressure. And you find out that actually, like, ceding the initiative to Makhachev, when he has a couple of basic but effective tools on the feet, and that just looming threat of the takedown that you always have to worry about, it's just a horrible thing to deal with. And he's so very different from Khabib as a fighter. But that's the fight I can't help but coming back to in my mind, is Poirier winging punches from way too far away and losing his balance. Like, that Khabib fight was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, I can't get taken down, and then everything he did made him more susceptible to getting taken down. Because he was so concerned about it. I'd love to see him do it, but I do not expect it to happen.
I don't think you can.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a break there. When we come back, the co-main event of this card, Sean Strickland versus Paulo Costa. We also have opening the main card, Randy Brown, Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos. We're going to talk about both of those, maybe something else, a couple brief mentions after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about the co-main event of UFC 302. Sean Strickland, Paulo Costa. I'm about to say something, Phil, that's going to shock you. I would love to see Paulo Costa beat Sean Strickland's ass. I'm just so done.
Really?
I'm so done with Sean Strickland at this point, man.
You were the original Sean Strickland fan.
I know.
Whenever he would come out and say something, you'd be like, no, he's still my boy.
Yeah.
He'd be like, you know, women need to get back in the kitchen. You'd be like, no, I still like Sean Strickland.
Like, that's just Sean, you know. Yeah, he's an idiot, but it's Sean. Yeah. Come on, look how weird his style is. Isn't that cool? Look how most of his fights are kind of boring, but he's trying. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I've been enjoying Sean Strickland's bizarre, janky style since the very beginning of his UFC career. And held on to that, and I do still think there are moments of earnestness and self-reflection from Sean Strickland that I can't help but find endearing. But to be quite honest, dude, like, fame has not been good for Sean Strickland.
No, as I said, like, it's his worst moments are his moments where he's like the raconteur.
Yes.
And it's just given him the opportunity to be the raconteur all the time.
Exactly. I think Sean Strickland has always, even when he was like a shithead little kid, it was like trying to impress his friends or whatever were probably the worst moments of his life. Where he was like, hey guys, check this out. That's Sean Strickland at 13. That's what he sounded like. Yeah. But to be honest, to be like, I used to be a white supremacist and then I met a black guy and he was actually pretty cool. And I was like, maybe he's a person. Anyway, Mexicans are destroying America. Like, you have to be the dumbest fucking guy on earth to have that moment be like a formative moment in your coming of age, and then to just turn into exactly the same kind of stupid shit-headed teenager when you're in front of an audience who cheers when you say the stupid stuff they want to hear. You have to be a fucking blockhead.
Yep.
And it has just made me think, God, just shut the fuck up, Sean.
The guy I was like 10 minutes ago was a fucking idiot. The person I am now, genius.
Yeah.
Got it all figured out. I know how society works now.
Yeah. Just like, shut the fuck up, Sean. This is stupid.
I used to think that I knew everything, but now I really do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You know, all people are prone to this kind of cyclical behavior, but he's just such a fucking obnoxious loudmouth with it that I'm finally like, I just can't. I just can't even like, I can't even like you as a character anymore, man. Which is the only way I was ever able to like Sean Strickland, you know? So, you know, is Paulo Costa a good guy? Absolutely not.
No.
But, you know, Paulo Costa's still funny.
Yeah.
He's still funny. He was doing that bit where he was going to the UFC PI, stealing Merab Dvalishvili's lunch. You know, doing like a joke where he was reviewing other fighters' lunches. It's pretty good. It's pretty funny. Yeah, I just want to see Sean lose. I would enjoy that. Anyway, about the actual dynamic of the fight itself, not just my personal feelings. What do you think? Paulo Costa actually had a good showing last time out. He did lose to Robert Whittaker, but based on the two fights prior, I don't think either of us expected him to look that composed or technical.
Yeah. I mean, so basically, had this been had he not had that Whittaker fight, I probably would have picked Strickland. As it is, I'm not sure. Because Strickland has a weird ability to, like, have super close fights with people that he doesn't necessarily win.
Yep.
Just based on, like, you know, poking and prodding. I think it was really, like, illustrative that someone on Twitter, like, sent us, when we were talking about the, Roman Dolidze's last fight. Right. Like, how did he not know how to deal with the jab? Hasn't he been training with Sean Strickland? And someone sent us, like, some of their training footage, and it's just Strickland just, like, trying to flying knee him over and over again.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, he does have this, like, really bizarre mentality of, you know, constantly talking about being the most ferocious badass that's out there.
Yeah.
And just, like, leaves it all in the sparring sessions. And then comes out and just has a the most controlled actual fights.
Yeah.
That look like a sparring session that you've ever seen.
Yeah, it's sort of like that other thing I was talking about this week on Twitter, which was Firas Zahabi telling people to stop using OnlyFans because it's lowering their T. And as somebody joked on Twitter, Firas Zahabi noted for his high T aggressive fighting style. It is funny to think these are the guys who are like boasting about their masculinity and their manliness. And then you get Sean Strickland in the cage, and it's like parry, 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 jab, parry, parry. It's like, it is a low T fighting style. I'm sorry. And I like it for that, you know? It's weird. It's dysfunctional, but in a functional way. And it's unique to Sean Strickland, but I don't know. I mean, I still think there is a I wouldn't even say a possibility. It is definitely going to work for stretches of this fight. Paulo Costa is not a good defensive fighter.
Nope.
At all. And as good as his own jab looked against Robert Whittaker, it's one of the main reasons that he was so competitive. He really was using his jab. He also got out-jabbed by Robert Whittaker. The fact that Whittaker kept his own lead hand working, you know.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was that, like, Whittaker was using his jab to get inside and then sort of punishing Costa with combinations in the pocket, right?
Yeah.
And he'd use that big, long, like, stepping up jab and then would, like, angle out whilst hitting Costa and get back out again. And yeah, this is the thing, is that, like, Strickland's going to do that to some extent. But also, like, just a big part of Strickland's fights is that he fights people like this who are in many ways just, you know, worse than him. And they'll just, if they want to, if they try, they can just push him out of the pocket by like hitting him harder than he's hitting them.
Or even just trying to hit him.
Costa's...
He's going to sacrifice his own positioning to not get hit. He does it all the time.
Yep.
And he, unlike Robert Whittaker, he's terrible at following up the jab.
Yes.
Sean Strickland has a worse right hand than GSP. You know?
Which means that, like, Costa's going to be able to, like, A, potentially jab with him, but it's B, just the fact that, like, as soon as Costa, like, bounces a punch off Strickland will back away and, like, Costa will be able to body kick him. And then Strickland will come in and then just jab him a few times. And it's just one of those fights where, as you said, like, Strickland's stuff is going to be working for long periods. But in everyone who's matched physicality like that with Strickland has mostly just tended to, like, overpower him over time.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of what happened with Duplessis. Like, Duplessis, obviously, is just a much worse technical fighter in many ways, but he's just a hoss, and by the end, Strickland was knackered. Similarly, like, Paulo Costa against Marvin Vettori. Like, Vettori, somewhere on that scale, in that he's in many ways, like, just a better, or at least more coherent, like, technical fighter in the pocket than Paulo Costa is, but eventually just got kind of shoved out of it by Paulo Costa because he's just a brute. Yep. Vettori couldn't really hang with him by the end of the fight.
Yeah, cannoneer for Strickland as well.
Cannoneer, exactly.
Yeah.
Super close fight. Trends in exactly the way you wouldn't think it would, given what both of these guys are. You're like, oh, Strickland's the pace and attrition guy, so he's going to be the one who's going to be, he's the more quote-unquote disciplined, but also the more, like, seasoned fighter in this kind of fight. He's going to be the one who's pulling away by the end of the fight, and it's just not how that fight looked. He won the early rounds, and then and then Cannoneer just started to shove him out of it.
Yeah, I mean,
I think this just seems like it's it's going to be close. Because I do expect, like, Strickland's just going to land lots of jabs, and I think that over time, assuming Costa, hasn't freaked out and isn't going to turn up looking like shit again, but I mean, even if he does, which he did against Vettori, he will eventually start just shoving Strickland out of the fight.
It's true. Yeah, I would say the only really bad performance Costa has had was the fight with Rockhold.
Yeah.
Right? That one really, well, and Adesanya. He absolutely shit the bed against Adesanya. But that was, if anything, a non-performance. He just didn't do enough. Like, he put himself in a position where he had to rely on his defense. And if you remember the start of this conversation, you will recall Paulo Costa does not have good defense. He is a fighter who absolutely needs to be pressuring, to be generating initiative, be making the opponent react to have a chance of winning the fight. And he did do that against Luke Rockhold, but his form just looked like shit. He looked like poorly prepared and out of shape. And Rockhold was just insane enough to like have a brawl. Maybe that's the thing too. Like, most people just won't have a brawl with Paulo Costa. Mm-hmm. And Luke Rockhold just said, fuck it. Like, I can't stop it from happening, so I'm going to go for it. And Costa just, I think Rockhold just turned it into the kind of dick measuring contest that Costa cannot refuse.
Yep.
And so it was an absolute mess. But, yeah, I don't know. Costa has remarkable conditioning. That Marvin Vettori fight, he came in like 7 pounds overweight or something. And he looked terrible, and he looked like he was blowing before the end of the first round. But he just recovered and kept pushing. And by the end, he was no more gassed than Vettori. Just wore him out. And so I really think all he has to do here to have really solid chances of winning is to spend like at least 60% of each round pressuring. Because one thing we know about Sean Strickland is he will never insist on pressure.
Yep.
Which is why Adesanya was a damn fool for fighting him the way he did. All you have to do is just don't take a step back, and he is not going to pressure you. And if you take a step forward, he will concede, and he will give ground. He wants to maintain that jabbing distance. And so you can simply use your feet to establish pressure against Sean Strickland. And as long as Costa does that, he has a solid jab. He can probably just start trading jabs with Strickland, keeping the pressure on. And he has the weapons to punish Strickland's kind of awkward like resets when he tries to angle out. He's got the low kicks. He's got the left hook to the body. These are great shots to force Strickland to give ground, force him to try to move laterally, and then clip him with a hard one as he does. So yeah, but it is otherwise going to be a fight where Paulo Costa is going to be eating a shitload of Sean Strickland's jabs.
Yep.
He's just not going to be able to stop them.
Yeah, I find it really, really hard to call.
Yep.
Because I think it's just this is just the kind of fight that Sean Strickland's always going to have with people like this.
Yep.
And it's, even that kind of, the Cannonier fight, for example, or the Duplessis fight, you can look back at them, you can just be like, who won that fight?
Uh-huh.
I don't really know. I kind of felt like Cannonier won it. I thought that maybe Strickland beat Duplessis, but there's just no clear winner in those fights. There just isn't.
Yeah.
There's no easy way to score it.
Even the Usman fight, way back in his welterweight days, is sort of the same kind of matchup. Mm-hmm. Just a big, powerful, methodically relentless opponent. Strickland will just let them stalk him for the entire fight. And I have said, like, Strickland actually does surprisingly well in that fight. You remember it as being a complete shit kicking. It is still close, but he also very clearly loses it because he cannot dissuade Usman from pressuring. That's all you have to do, and you are at the very least going to get a close fight where Strickland, even more than usual, shows zero ability to follow up on his jab. And you're going to get a lot of chances to run him into stuff.
Yeah.
Come forward. Don't get over fixated on hitting him to the head. Be happy with body shots and leg kicks. Those are the things that are going to land easily. And you are going to have a good shot of winning. I am going to pick Paulo Costa. A lot of it depends on how he looks and how disciplined he is. Strickland is like an IQ test opponent, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty damn certain what you're going to get out of him. And what kind of fight you have really depends on the approach you take. But given what Costa usually likes to do, even against really fearsome fighters like Yoel Romero, given what he did in that against Marvin Vettori, what he did in that Robert Whittaker fight, he does like to pressure. And if somebody is just willing to give ground and trying to maintain distance, he's going to stay on them. So I'm going to take him.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know. I think I am going to pick Strickland, basically for two reasons. One, as you said, I don't know how Paulo Costa's going to look.
Mm-hmm.
And in a fight which I think is close enough, I will take, potential variance in one direction is enough for me. If Strickland is anything else, is anything, he is incredibly consistent.
Yeah. Maddeningly consistent.
Yes.
Like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's also different. The fact that, like, if this was this is 3 rounds, right?
Yes.
We have occasionally messed this up and, like, not realized that things are...
Oh, I should double check, but I'm pretty damn sure. Let's look at it on Tapology.
I would
go on.
As I said, I think despite the fact that one of these guys is a huge bricked up muscle puncher,
mm-hmm.
and the other one is like the most controlled jabber in like the sport probably,
mm-hmm.
I simply trust Paulo Costa to be up on the like cardio and physicality end of things by the end of this fight.
Good thing you mentioned it, Phil. It is, according to Tapology, a 5-round fight.
Oh, God damn it. That makes it hard now. I thought I had 2 things that were allowing me to pick Sean Strickland. Now
5 rounds? Strickland doesn't really win those if the guy's pressuring him. It's always the last 2 rounds that he like loses to Cannonier.
Right.
And to Dricus.
Yep. He fights big muscle hosses, and they're like, yeah, I'm still here. And he's like, well, I was a former welterweight. But I'm tired. And I'm tired now. Yeah.
I think it's because he's so fucking twitchy.
Mm.
You know, like Strickland is, he's a high strung striker.
He's just not physically very overwhelming at all. He wasn't even as a welterweight.
Yeah, that's it. But even these fights at range, if he is being pressured, you know, like he could do it against Uriah Hall. That was a 5-rounder, right? But Strickland or Adesanya. But he got to pressure. He didn't really have to deal with a lot. I think if you make him think defensively, because this is the thing with Strickland, he is a good defensive fighter.
Mm-hmm.
But he shouldn't be. You know what I mean? He is constantly in a position where he needs to make a critical decision to stop the punch from hitting him. He's constantly square. Yes. He is constantly tall. And so he has to get his hands in the way or get his head out of position. It's super reliant on reaction time. And I think
also a lot of his defense, the functionality of his defense is primarily mental, which means that, like, I think for a lot of people, the experience of fighting Sean Strickland is that they keep trying to hit him cleanly and they can't.
Yeah.
And they're like, this feels really bad.
Yeah, I hate this.
Trying to hit this man. I do not enjoy, like, getting all my punches, like, parried and so on. And so they stop.
Yeah.
there's not actually a counter-punching threat coming back at them. They're not doing it because he's drawing them into something and then, hurting them for it. They simply stop because it doesn't feel nice. But there's not actually there's no actual threat, which is why people who are just like, I'm going to hit this man. It just kind of works. Eventually, they'll land enough grazing shots on him.
Yeah.
And they'll land 1 or 2 clean ones. He just ends up in these miserably close fights.
Or they'll throw combinations, and go figure that works when the guy's right there and he's trying to stop everything with his hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
okay,
part
5
of it.
rounds. I'm also taking Paulo Costa.
It is also the physicality thing, which maybe Costa won't test him on, because both Cannonier and Dricus did ugly wrestling on Sean Strickland, and that was part of how they tired him out. Of course, Usman, though that was a 3-rounder, that was a big part of what tired Strickland out in that fight too. Costa may. I kind of doubt that he's going to go for a lot of wrestling. But I don't know. Costa just doesn't gas like you would expect him to, and Strickland he does kind of gas in a way that you would never expect him to. In these long fights. He doesn't fall apart, but he does his already, shall we say, reserved output does tend to diminish deep into 5-round fights.
Yeah, and it's also just that, there's only so many ways that you can parry shots by, you can defend shots by, leaning away and parrying and so on, is that eventually his opponents just start, figuring him out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there isn't actually really much coming back at me.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel nice to attack this man, but eventually if I just keep doing it, it works.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Good shout mentioning the possibility of a 5-rounder. I would never have assumed, but there's no note on Wikipedia. I do like that we're starting to see more 5-round co-mains.
Yeah.
Always in favor of longer fights, even if this doesn't seem like it'll be a super exciting long fight. I'm still happy to see the extra rounds. Gives you a chance for a different kind of story to play out.
Yeah, I just think that the difference between Whittaker and Strickland's common opponents, with the exception of Adesanya, obviously, is just that he's just really potent. So when he was fighting Cannonier and Costa, he was hurting them.
Right.
And, yeah, Strickland just did not do that.
Yep.
Just could not find ways to really discourage Cannonier from his game.
Yep. Or Dricus.
Yeah, I don't know if he can discourage...
Robert hurt Dricus too. Yeah. He hurt him too. He just can't stop that man. But, yeah. Strickland really paid for being completely incapable of hurting Dricus. He paid for it against Cannonier. He paid for it against Usman. None of these guys are invulnerable. Strickland is just kind of impotent.
Yep.
Unless you're Israel Adesanya.
Yeah, who just didn't try for the most part. And he still hurt Strickland.
And Strickland's
the second round.
Strickland's offense still waned dramatically in the last rounds of that fight, except for the final 10 seconds when he has a chance to convince himself he's a badass. Even then, when he was getting to pressure almost the entire time, he still just kind of was getting a little weary and running out of gas. Yeah, it is a strange thing. I always expect guys whose main training is sparring to have just innately good cardio. Cause nothing prepares you for the thing you're training for, doing the thing, Whatever kind of super specific cardiovascular systems you need, whatever balance of, I don't remember what they're called, the 3 sort of types of, energy production in the body, but whatever balance you need for MMA, I think doing MMA is a pretty good way of developing it as a rule. And yet Strickland does have a tendency to slow down pretty noticeably late in long fights. I don't know. I have some ideas. Yep. It's difficult to fully explain, but we're both going to take Borrachinha. Right when we get to the point in the fight where you can really see the gaps in Polo's hair plugs, Strickland is going to start losing, basically. When there's enough sweat that's just thinning out that thatch of hair, that's when Strickland is going to start feeling uncomfortable and feeling the pressure.
Yep. But whatever happens, I think it's almost certainly going to be outrageously close.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Neither of these guys is particularly good at dominating like a capable, somewhat defensively sound, somewhat resourceful opponent. Like a crafty opponent, they both can't help but have a close fight.
Yep.
So yeah, 5-rounder. Happy about that, especially because it makes me feel better about picking Sean Strickland to lose because I'm done with him. Let's take a break. When we come back, Randy Brown, Zaleski, Dos Santos, after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Hello, and welcome back to Heavy Hands. I don't know why I said hello. That was a strange way to to resume the show, wasn't it, Phil?
Just greeting the listeners.
Yeah, I'm just being polite.
Who have not been listening to you for all of like a few seconds.
Yeah, in fact, they literally just stopped listening to me because why would they not skip the break? They just hit the right arrow on their keyboard 4 times and you're there. Anyway, welcome back. Let's talk about the main card opener of 302. Now, it's I have such trouble. I'm so unconfident pronouncing Elizeu's full name, including that part, that I've just started calling him Zaleski because it's the most fun and easiest part to say. I mean, I guess Dos Santos, but I'm just not, which one's the last name? I don't know how things work in South America with the naming conventions in Portugal and Spain either. So I'm just going to say Zaleski.
ZDS, surely.
Oh, ZDS. That's true. People say that, don't they?
ZDS, obviously, but...
No, you already said it. You know, ZDS sounds better. ZDS sounds terrible.
It does, I gotta admit. Of all the many amazing things that that England has done for the world, which have made us so widely beloved, just putting the last letter of the alphabet as just some bullshit is a particularly odd choice.
Just in this,
means our alphabet song doesn't rhyme at all.
Oh God, that's true. You probably got the song from us, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then it just thuds in with Zed at the end.
Look, I think Zed is a better sounding name. Just in a vacuum, it's a fun word to say. Zed.
Yep.
It just doesn't work with ZDS. Anyway, he's fighting Randy Brown, whose name is normal, and I know how to say it. What do you think?
I don't really have much to go on to make me think this, but I don't think ZDS is going to be very good at fighting a range opponent.
No.
Because Randy Brown is essentially without getting racist with it, he has basically a lot of the same weaknesses as Neil Magny whilst being a completely different fighter in terms of the potency of how he fights, the way he fights, everything like that. But it's still just the main thing is that he is a giant dude, and if you are a good pressure fighter, especially if you have good low kicks, or if you are just a really coherent wrestler, you're just gonna fuck him up.
Can I say something, Phil? I think you could have made that comparison without without the disclaimer that it was possibly about to be racist made me very uncomfortable.
I'm getting a lot of questions about my "I'm not a racist" T-shirt.
Yeah,
which are adequately answered by my T-shirt. No, but these are very different.
I choked on my drink. I was so anxious about what you were about to say, but it was perfectly inoffensive.
Not to get too racist with it, but I think he's going to lose because his race just doesn't have the grit and determination of the white man. No.
Yeah, not to get racist with it, but I think Randy Brown's bone density is different from a normal person's. Yeah. I think he has an extra bone in his leg. All right. Well, Phil, it's been good.
But there is like a real tendency for like people to conflate
black
fighters who just look like real similar, like physically and in terms of where they're from. But like both Randy Brown and Neil Magny have like very similar weaknesses, despite being super different. But the main thing is that like if you can't capitalize on Randy Brown's weaknesses, he is insanely potent. He is just absolutely lethal to hang out at range against. He's like a decent low kicker. He's got a genuinely nasty jab. He can hit submission takedown. He can hit submissions if he's taken down, but you know it's more of a oh no, I'm here and I better try and win the fight as quickly as possible kind of thing, rather than it is like him being any kind of Chelsea Oliveira. But yeah, it's just that he's just insanely dangerous. And yeah, ZDS is one of those fighters who has elements of what he needs here. He's just, you know, he hits hard, he throws in combination, he can kick, he can low kick.
He is also very dangerous.
What's that?
He is also very dangerous.
Yes. But he's also just someone who primary range weapon is weird kicks, and mostly just likes to swing hooks as counters. Mm-hmm. Like his main way that he makes things work is that like he allows people into his space and then just scares them back out of it by throwing a bunch of punches at them. I'm just not sure if that's going to work against Randy Brown. I just don't think you can allow him to, you know, similarly to like Muslim Salikov. Very similarly to Muslim Salikov. If that's your thing, it's like, I'm just going to counter with hooks in the pocket. Randy Brown is just going to nuke you with artillery from a range you cannot possibly touch him.
That's true.
And, ZDS has looked up and down lately. I was quite concerned about him. Yeah, after the fight with the Leech.
Yep.
He did get hurt, I believe, in the first round with Fakhratinov.
Yes, he did.
He also had a very close fight with Muslim Salikov, who, as we mentioned, Randy Brown effortlessly smoked. But yeah, I think it's just one of those ones where like DDS just does not solve the Randy Brown style matchup. I think he's probably getting knocked out early, much like Salikov was.
I got a couple counterpoints just to consider. You have said, I think quite correctly, that Dos Santos is going to struggle with the long-range approach of Randy Brown. What about the other 50% of what Randy Brown is going to do on the feet, where he is not insisting on a long range and is in fact trying to be a cool, slick man in the pocket? This is the fundamental issue with Randy Brown. He is not reliable. He is not a consistent fighter. He will.
This is true. I mean, even in like winnable style matchups,
Chaos
say, like
Williams,
Nico Price, or Chaos Williams, a very winnable style matchup, he'll still find ways to like make it close or get himself finished.
Always, he will just Randy Brown. He I wouldn't even say he takes his eye off the ball. I think he gets fixated on a cool idea.
Yep.
And loses sight of what he should be doing strategically. I mean, like cyclically throughout a single fight. He will do this over and over. And he will have to be harshly reminded to go back to what is working. But, you know, like Sean Strickland and his fear of people who don't look like Sean Strickland, he will always return to his old ways. He just can't escape that cycle. So that's a thing. I mean, if he just nukes Zaleski at range, which he could, this is one of the concerning things about Zaleski since the Leach fight is that he's just been getting hurt a lot.
Yep.
He does, however, tend to recover, and he is extremely dangerous when hurt. If Randy Brown can't put him away, there's a strong chance that Randy Brown just stops having the fight that got him that result, at least for a while, and ends up in trouble. There is also the possibility of ZDS wrestling him, which is part of the Neil Magny-ness. Like, offensively, I don't think Randy Brown's like Neil Magny at all, but as like a tall guy who gets backed up to the cage, in weaknesses and defensive deficiencies, he is a lot like Neil Magny. I think that's what you were saying, right?
Yeah.
And that is one of the similarities there, too. Randy Brown can get his ass put up against the fence and just get completely out-wrestled. This is something ZDS will do to people. I recall him, for example, even doing it with a little success, and also escaping the takedowns in his fight long ago with Nicholas Dalby. He got taken down plenty, but didn't get controlled, and got some control of his own when he hit his own takedowns. And then the other thing is that while that Salikov fight had a super impressive result for Randy Brown, and I was very pleased to see him pull off something so simple. You know, just a beautiful right hand off the jab, the kind of stuff a guy built like Randy Brown should be doing. I did kind of think things were going pear-shaped right at the start because he was getting leg kicked a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And
but also that was also like surprisingly good strategic game planning from Muslim Salikov.
Yeah. But it
wasn't like we were just like, no, I don't think Muslim Salikov's going to do that. But he did.
But Zaleski does do it as a rule. He is a low kicker. Maybe not always super consistent, but it is. So yeah, I don't know. The real thing is I just don't trust Randy Brown. I agree with everything, and I think that this is a super winnable style matchup for Randy, but I think we and he were somewhat fortunate to see that Salikov fight play out the way it did. And we saw little glimmers of how, had it gone on longer, it could have gotten a lot closer. You know, could have been not nearly so decisive. So there's just a note of caution, really. Anytime that you're feeling confident about a Randy Brown win, you got to kind of...
Yeah, that's a good point.
You got that. You got the Chaos Williams fight. He has a way of allowing the opponent back in and letting it become very close. And close in a scary way, too. You know, that's the thing with Randy. It's not like when Sean Strickland's fights get close, like we were talking about before, with Cannonier and whatnot. It's like suddenly Randy Brown is almost getting finished.
Yep.
And then he's almost
he is getting finished, like he was against Jack Della Maddalena.
Yeah, or that. Yeah, where he just was doing great, took his eye off the ball, got backed into the fence, and just got nuked. So yeah, that's all I'll say. I think I feel fine picking Randy Brown. I think it's basically bound to be a very fun fight for as long as it lasts. But if you are banking on getting ZDS out of there quickly and efficiently, you're probably in for a very difficult fight if that does not happen.
Yep, it's very true. He's just... Yeah, that is the flip side of like Randy Brown being potent, is that he's just not consistent at all round to round.
Yeah. And one thing that is consistent about ZDS, he's a monster in round 3.
Yep.
The crazier the fight is early, the more he gets hurt. If he makes it to round 3, you're just dealing with a madman. Even in that fight with Rinat Fakhretdinov, where he was just losing immediately.
Yeah, I mean, that's how he managed to pull a draw out of that. He got a very rare 10-8 that literally everyone agreed on.
Benoit Saint-Denis, same thing. Crazy round 3 from Zaleski. It is a very consistent thing with him. The deeper the fight goes, the more determined he is to put a hurting on you. So, I'll take Randy Brown, but I'm pretty cautious about this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm less cautious. I gotta take Randy just because I just feel like he's gonna be out on a very significant lead.
Mm-hmm.
Like right away, and I'm also just not convinced that ZDS won't get finished. So yeah, it's just 2 factors is enough for me.
Yep. All right, last thing on this card, Grant Dawson is back. No, I'm just kidding. That'll do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. We're going to squeak in that Heavy Henka episode with Miguel Class, I think, just before the end of the month. Oh, that's right. Thank God, May has 31 days. I have a day to post it. So we're going to be recording that later this week. So if you want our recap and discussion of this latest Sumo Basho, this latest sumo tournament, make sure you check that out. That will be a lot of fun. I'm very much looking forward to talking to Miguel about it. Check out my work on the finer points of face punching, facepunching.substack.com. I'll have a Dustin Poirier article out this week, and then probably, unless a big surprise happens, an Islam Makhachev article coming out next week. And, make sure you find us on Twitter as well, at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil. At Boxing Bush. That's me. And until next week, when we will be talking to you about UFC 302 and looking forward with bated breath to Cannonier versus Nasruddin Imavov. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.